The Nintendo Switch is entering its 7th year on the market this year. Regardless of what you think, the Switch generation is winding down, and I believe that 2023 is going to be the last calendar year for this Switch that's closing in on 7 years old will be supported, at least from its primary standpoint. The question I have going into this year is, what's next for Nintendo? Not where the Switch Pro is, or Switch 2, or whatever have you, what's next for the big end? Nintendo's known for going for the beat of their own drum. They've got patterns for sure, but for the most part, they're the king of left fields. Nintendo is in an interesting spot. The Switch is a successful system for them, slowly becoming their best-selling platform. What they do next sets the stage for the next 5 years. A misstep can really hurt them. The Wii U is a good example of that. I think a misstep at this stage in the game, however, could really hurt Nintendo a lot more. Why, you ask? The Switch generation has been a mixed bag. Successful, yes, but I don't know about you, but I feel like the Nintendo fanbase has been a lot more negative and pissed off at the big end, more than usual, and there are some bad decisions that they have made, whether that be the pricing of Wii U ports or them relying on said ports to bolster their lineup. Going into the generation, I like many of you, thought Nintendo would utilize those Wii U ports for the first 2 years, all of the PS4 and Xbox One generation, where those systems for the first 2 years were flooded with PS3 and 360 ports. But we're at a point now where I can easily see them put out another Wii U port this year. Please be Xenoblade X. The Switch has a lot of great games on the platform, and I've had a lot of fun with said games, but take out all the ports, first and third party, what are we left with? Mario Odyssey, Fire Emblem 3 Houses, Splatoon 2 and 3 if you want to really count those, Pokemon Pick One, I don't really care, etc. Compared to even the Wii, man, I really hate that console, but the Wii had even more new games, and that's the key here, new games, not ports, remasters, or half sequels. I digress, however. The point I'm trying to make here is that Nintendo's kind of sat pretty this generation. They didn't really try that hard. I'm talking about in-house Nintendo. Their partners like Next Level Games, Intelligent Systems, HAL Laboratories, etc. have been pumping out games, whether you like them or not. I know with how Nintendo operates post GameCube, anything that's not, their upper AAA, their upper echelon franchises like Mario, Zelda, Splatoon, can only be done by a third party or partner, which I don't agree with, at least from the standpoint of we're not going to do it unless the partner itself comes to us and wants to do it. All I want is F-Zero. That's not even to mention the people who are just tired of the Switch's hardware and the gimmick itself. So what can Nintendo do next? I'm going to go over 2 scenarios that Nintendo could potentially do. As the name suggests, Nintendo would try in this scenario a Switch with a new chipset, obviously for Nvidia, an OLED screen, hopefully new Joy-Cons that don't drift, and backwards compatibility with the original Switch. Now that's something I think Nintendo will do in both scenarios that I have. It makes sense on a technical level. I also think that Nintendo won't abandon using cartridges. In this scenario, Nintendo's gonna Nintendo and do something completely different, abandon the hybrid nature of the Switch, or something completely bonkers. It's Nintendo. Figuring out what they will do next is impossible. So, what are they gonna do? Literally anything. So instead of predicting what type of new hardware, let's talk about what it means. In the past, whenever Nintendo just makes the same console, it really hasn't been successful for them. You may think, oh, what about the Super Nintendo? Super Nintendo was successful. Yes, the Super Nintendo in a vacuum, when you compare it to the Sega Genesis, sold a lot more, but compared to the NES, it was a bit of a drop-off. The N64 wasn't that different to the SNES or even the NES, just better graphics, a new controller, and yes, the jump to 3D, the biggest jump we've seen and will ever see in gaming. But outside of that, it's not that different from the SNES, and the biggest fumble by them is, of course, sticking with cartridges. Go even deeper, the GameCube I know nowadays people love the GameCube and love to speak and be like, yo, the GameCube's amazing, the GameCube's this, the GameCube's that. But when the GameCube was out, Nintendo was struggling to sell that console. They were struggling during that generation. It was so bad that they had to pivot so hard to give us the Wii. Now, there's multiple reasons as to why the GameCube failed, whether that be, I think the biggest proponent was just the time. At that time, gaming at the time was seen as, mature, adult, all this stuff. Then you have the little GameCube with the handle like a lunchbox over there, it's crazy. But I digress. They found success doing different things, like I said, with the Wii, the Switch, or even the DS and the 3DS. The Wii U is an outlier in all this, of course, because they tried something different, but because of the success of the Wii, they wanted to stick with it. So that's why they kept the name, kept the controllers, etc, etc. The thing about this route is that it's a risk. It's a big risk switching gears like that. get it, but it can be super rewarding, like the Switch and the Wii. The thing about this route is that this is a more likely route Nintendo can take, because Nintendo is known for doing the complete opposite of what we think Nintendo's gonna do. Think back to the Wii, during the Wii days, especially like during 2008, 2009, people were expecting Nintendo to come out with a revision, literally just called the Wii HD, with a Wii with an HDMI port, maybe a bit of a spec bump to deal with the aging hardware that was the Wii at the time. Where at that time the Wii was basically a generation behind everything else. It was basically a GameCube, two GameCubes duct taped together, and people were really expecting Nintendo to just capitalize on success and make a revision, but they didn't. They waited, and then in 2012 they came out with the Wii U, and for better or for worse, it was a decision for sure. And so with that, it's like Nintendo has found success pivoting over the years. They pivot too hard, and you get something like the Wii U. Although Nintendo's just found success pivoting. They pivot harder when it's a failure, and they don't pivot too much if it's a success. I feel like, especially in this day and age, I feel like it's more feasible for Nintendo to just come out with the Switch with a better chipset, with all that fancy stuff, whether that be DLSS, all that fancy bells and whistles with it, Joy-Cons that don't drift, of course. I want Nintendo to be wacky. I want Nintendo to be innovative. I want them to be competitive, but also innovative. I don't want them to do just the same thing as the PlayStation and the Xbox, just a box that sits there and plays games, even if it's at like a beautiful thing like it does with the PS5 and Series X. But it's like, the one thing I love about Nintendo is that they bring that innovation to the industry. They make their consoles have personality to a degree. PS5 and the Series X, and it's like, at the end of the day, they're just boxes that play games. They're PCs in a box, essentially, and there's not really much of that spunk and personality. If anything, PlayStation, who's known for their personality in the past, has kind of been more muted and in the background. Even when you look at their marketing, how they handle themselves, Nintendo's fallen into this as well, of not having a face to the name. There's a faceless corporation. But if you look at the console itself, it's even something as small as the controller, the DualSense having a white and gray colored buttons versus, no colors for like the different buttons. Even as something as iconic with Sony being square is purple, X or cross is blue, circle is orange or red, depending on how your eyes are wired, and triangle is green, and seeing the DualSense not having that, just all muted white and black. And I want Nintendo to not only be successful, but be innovative, do something different. They don't have to be competitive. If you look at where it's at right now, there is no console wars. There is no being competitive. Xbox is doing their own thing. Sony's doing their own thing. This is where Nintendo can shine at doing their own. They can't just stick with the Switch. This past year was very telling that they cannot stick with this hardware anymore. And I know Nintendo knows that. Nintendo themselves obviously knows that. So hopefully this year we start to see that wind down. Tears of the Kingdom comes out, and it's gonna be amazing, hopefully, and we go from there. But yeah, with that being said, comment down below what you guys think about all this. What do you think is next for Nintendo? Do you think Nintendo's gonna just release another Switch, a Switch Pro, or a Switch 2 rather, or will they do something completely different like I've talked about? Yeah, let me know what you guys think. With that being said, this has been Moawe, signing out.